In accordance with
Mr.
what
Sunday.
I just said. In accordance with what I
It
just
seems like
said.
your methods of
In
interlocution are far beneath you
in
in this conversation.
accordance, this was their policy,
Mr. President.
which conditions did not permit them to follow through on. Yes?
That's why there's a difference between a desire and a policy. Okay.
The dictionary definition, LonerBox. I made it dumb for you. Policy, a course or principle of action adopted or proposed by a government, party, business, or individual.
Bro, how did I get President Sunday to deny the Holocaust? I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to. What is this? There's no... Hang on. Hang on. I never thought I'd see a decent point in a Sunday stream. Good job, LonerBox. LonerBox, policy is when calculated and prepared. LonerBox sadly had been disappointment for a while now, but I never thought he will make such idiotic claim. You mean when he claimed the Holocaust was official Nazi policy? It wasn't. That's why people don't point to it when arguing with Nazi apologists who downplay the Holocaust. But the transfer wasn't Zionist policy because it wasn't in print? Bro, if I got Sunday saying that the Holocaust wasn't policy now, on the record, how did I do that to him? The Wannsee conference doesn't point to a policy? Listen, I'm not the one making the claim. I don't know what he would say about Wannsee. Or I guess that like institutionalized mass murder machine just appeared without any directive from the top down. Like, how did that happen? Have I just convinced Sunday to do Holocaust denial? Oh no.
That you look at what is done. No, LonerBox.
No, that's wrong. The Holocaust wasn't literal Nazi policy.
Yeah, no, it wasn't. You should look up the movie Conspiracy and learn about the Wannsee Conference. The only reason we know about the Wannsee Conference is because someone did not destroy their notes when the war was ending. Like, this was not a announced policy. This was.
But I will say, everyone in the German government was backing it, and they all knew where they were going.
And do you
that's
know?
the point.
And do you know
they
how
all knew where they were going?
And do you know? I'm curious if he understands what policy, but he must understand what policy means because that's just wrong. We literally only know about the specific intentions of the Holocaust by reference to recorded meetings in journals. That's why the whole there are whole projects devoted to just
and
digging
the policies
these up.
that were passed. The policies that were passed. The first one that ever really targeted the Jews was they made it.
Why are you adding announced? Hang on. LonerBox, I don't think you understand what policy means. Policy means the official program that has been announced. It's literally not policy unless it's been announced and disseminated amongst the body.
I know what, if you guys want the TLDR, you can watch it if you want. What was happening in this debate was I was explaining the difference, the policy debate over the Nakba in 48 between the Arab position, which was that there was a calculated and premeditated plan ordered from the top down to mass expel the Arabs in 48, okay? And then there is the Israeli narrative, the right-wing Israeli narrative, which is that basically everyone fled either just because of, that's what happens in war or because they were told to, right? That's it. But the Benny Morris answer was that it's somewhere in the middle. Not quite a de jure policy, but there was very much a communication of understanding amongst the upper echelons. It was definitely not punishable to expel a village. Plan Dalit basically gave people carte blanche to do it. I mean, they said it was conditional on resistance, but sometimes they expel people for not, even when they didn't resist. So, but again, when they say it wasn't policy, it's because people were not reprimanded for expelling any villages, but at the same time, people were not reprimanded for not expelling villages when they were told to either, like Nazareth, right? So that's it. That's the argument. But like Sunday just, I think he does this thing where he feels out of his depth on a particular subject. So he just started getting into this really ridiculous semantic argument about what policy means. And he got really angry. Holy shit. But in order to further that point, now we're going to say the Holocaust wasn't policy because, but like, for me, I don't get that because like in the Nakba, you can see how you don't need a policy to have soldiers choosing to expel villages, even when they're not explicitly ordered to, because there was the understanding, there was the kind of like, there was the sort of carte blanche that was offered to it through Plan Dalit. There was people in the middle who felt okay issuing orders because they knew they wouldn't get in trouble for it. But I don't really know how you arrive at that I can see how you arrive at that, like the expulsions, the 50 out of 400 villages being expelled. I can see that happening without policy. It's very easy to see how that happen, and also with the flight and all that. Like, but I don't know how you can see the gas chambers and the Einsatzgruppen happening on an industrial scale without a policy, bro. This is, I'm perplexed, as Sunday would say. The man. I want to tweet it, but then I also don't want to get doxxed and harassed to the ends of the earth. It's just by a crazy person. But yeah, I don't know, whatever. It's just really funny. I'm sorry.
He was quoted as saying, "quote We need to deal a blow that
there's a time to walk. There's a time to stand your ground, and there's a time to walk away." All right. He kicked me from the call in front of 200 people. It's okay. I'm not, whilst denying that the Holocaust was a policy. Me.
Hasn't been seen in 50 years and take down Gaza, end quote. You can't strip the quotation of Hamas, a entity you're at war with, and then pretend that there's genocidal intent. That's not how
That's not genocidal intent.
So when the Ukrainians say we need to defeat Russia,
that's not genocidal.
No. When Ukraine says we need to defeat Russia, is that genocidal? Do they mean killing all Russian citizens?
That's a good question.
Professor Morris, here's another one.
It's ridiculous.
When the defense, ridiculous.
Yes, ridiculous.
The American judge.
He also doesn't determine policy.
The American judge read.
You are holding the American judge to
Well, he was the president.
Because he'll appeal to authority when it agrees with him, and we won't deal with the actual facts of the matter ever.
Okay. The American judge read several of the quotes.
Look at the American Supreme Court today. They may support Trump.
Okay.
It's even in the Holocaust Encyclopedia. Don't fuck it. Oh, bro! How did I get President Sunday to deny the Holocaust? I didn't mean to. I'm not a manipulator. Okay, the Holocaustopedia. Okay, we'll put it into a draft. Okay, and we'll think about it. I'm gonna die, man. What a funny evening. I feel like that's a reasonable screenshot. I just want to make sure that Holocaust Encyclopedia is in there. Like, I don't know. Fuck off. Well, how many times did they say policy on this page? Hang on. For Vance. No one objected to the final solution policy that Heydrich announced. Okay. We have to, if we're doing this, we have to do it well. Okay. We have to go hard. How are people unaware that the final solution was a policy? They're not even unaware, okay? They just got too hung up on the fucking Nakba argument because they don't understand it. I say he. So he just decided to... What a fucking state, bro. What's this? Oh, someone's already put it on Reddit. Oh, it's rough out there, guys. Jokers and spades, thanks for the $5. I feel like Norman comes off as needing Benny's approval distressingly desperately, and that gave Benny all the power in this debate. All right. Hello.
Howdy ho.
Hey, how's it going?
Oh, it's going swell. Weather is lovely here. So you understand the contradiction I'm pointing to, right?
No.
No, okay. So in my chat, very quickly, you were saying that transfer was not Zionist policy because of the absence of official written proclamations to that effect. And so you were saying that, oh, well, we have journals and letters and correspondences in secret, but that doesn't really count. But then you're also saying that the Holocaust was Nazi policy, despite the absence of that. So you're basically at odds with your own reasoning. You see what I'm pointing out here? It's a little bit strange that you wouldn't catch this.
No, I can tell you exactly what I mean. If you want, I'll try once.
Fuck bastard.
There are probably three explanations broadly for why an atrocity happens. One is people just kind of do it off their own accord, like soldiers lose their heads and just massacre people. No one tells them to do it, they just do it. The other extreme end would be that there is a directive, a calculated plan from the top down that is directed, such as I would say Vance is a good example of that. And then somewhere in the middle, you have something that is not de jure policy, is not directed from the top down as a kind of blanket rule, but it is very much allowed, and there's an understanding amongst leaders that this is basically okay to do, which is what I would argue happened in 1948, like Morris.
Well, I think it's pretty clear. I think it's pretty clear from the records that we have that it's not that it was okay to do; it's that this is what they would do, given that the conditions permitted it.
That doesn't
Yes.
contradict what I said, though.
But
That's
it
not the
actually
same
does,
as
though. It
the
actually
third one.
does, though, because it would be identical to if, for example, the Nazis prior to enacting the Holocaust were concerned about some international reprisal, and so had it as internal policy that they discussed among themselves, but didn't say publicly or to the international community, hey, under such and such conditions, we can't say that we're going to do this, but under such and such conditions, if the stars align, we will. That's a policy with a contingency. There's no contradiction there.
But Wannsee was a policy. They enacted it as policy. That's why it was an industrial scale slaughter with death camps and death squads and
But it wasn't an
train
official
lines.
policy. It
What
wasn't
do you
an
mean?
official
But
policy.
We're not talking about official policy. Do you mean public?
But we kind of are, though.
No, that's not the
because if you're
variable,
going to
though.
argue, that the very clear intent that's written down by these people in their journals, letters, and correspondence with each other, in records of their meetings with each other, that this is what they are going to do as soon as they are able to do so. That's policy by your metric. That's
No,
the
it's not by
exact
my
same
metric.
thing. The only difference is that it is more difficult for them to do, and so they have to incorporate contingencies into that policy.
My metric. Can you tell me what I
No,
said?
you're just
about the three
just
different
basically
ways?
contradicting your use of these terms. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
Can you tell me what I said then about the three different ways atrocities happen? 1, 2, and 3.
That's immaterial. We're talking about the definition of a policy. This is what you said in my chat. Stop trying to divert.
I'm not trying to. I've told you my explanation.
You're literally
the
trying
difference
to
between
divert.
policy and
this is
unofficial
why
action.
this is why I shut
You're
you down. because
diverting.
kind of
You
a
don't know
snake.
anything about this conversation. You don't know
I
about
actually
the debate over the Nakba.
I
And you are
actually am
and now
directly
you are
responding to the exact language that you said.
retreating to a semantic dispute that means
Retreating to
absolutely
what?
nothing,
Your
and it's
entire
got you
argument is
inadvertently
semantic.
denying
I'm
that the
correcting you
Holocaust was
because
a
you're
policy
contradicting yourself.
in order to get
Holocaust
yourself
was
out of the fact that
policy.
you don't know.
If the Holocaust is policy, then transfer is definitionally policy according to your own use of that term. Because once again, there are no public statements to that effect.
Why do you keep injecting
your
public?
argument against
A policy
your
can happen
argument-
covertly. It can be secret.
I agree. So if, for example, leaders are agreeing amongst themselves that under opportune conditions they will do this, that's policy.
Okay.
The only difference
Do you know
between
how
that
Wannsee
and the
was
case
like-
of the Holocaust,
Okay.
the only difference between that and the case of the Holocaust is that in the Holocaust, they were able to do it.
Is that one was ordered from the top down? Well, first of all, the Zionists managed to get rid
They
of
were
quite a
both
lot of
ordered from the
Arabs. What are
top
you
down. We're
talking-
talking about Ben-Gurion saying this.
Ben Gurion ordered a mass expulsion from the top down. Is that what you're saying?
No, Ben-Gurion agreed to terms
okay.
with the understanding that these were tentative.
That's not the same as policy. That's not how anyone uses
But what-
the word.
that
That's
actually
what
is
whole
the same as
debate is.
policy.
Okay,
The only
you can have the
distinction-
debate
the
then
only
with yourself
distinction-
and other people then, because this is not how
No, no, no.
anyone
If
who's
the-
ever
if
made
the-
this argument has
if
this
the-
has this debate.
A policy,
Why
a policy is a directive or a plan of action or an attitude, et cetera, et cetera. It can be as broad as even just a general philosophy of approach to a thing. It is the policy of this government to not
policy can just be
negotiate
a
with
general
terrorists and so on and so
philosophy.
forth. Beg your
Is that what you're
pardon?
saying? So a
A
policy,
policy,
can be just
a policy can represent a standard attitude towards a certain thing. So, for example, it can be a policy of this government to not negotiate with terrorists. That is not a directive to not negotiate with this specific terrorist at this particular time. That's just a standing thing. So, for example, if you open-endedly say, yeah, we're going to agree to these terms with the understanding between us that while we can't do so right now, when we can, we will pursue transfer, that's a policy. By the exact same metric that you are judging the Holocaust to be a policy.
No, these are pretty different metrics. The top-down directive from
They're
the Holocaust
identical.
was
They're identical.
incredibly clear. There are
They're
thousands
both
of
top down.
documents
I'm sorry.
from the
I'm
Wannsee
sorry. You
Conference and
suggesting
from the camps
just to
and
be
from the-
clear, just to be clear, are you suggesting that transfer was supposed to be effected from the bottom up as some sort of grassroots anarchist project?
You didn't
What
listen
the
to what I
fuck are you
said.
talking
You haven't
about?
listened. No, I know you're saying
I've
that.
listened
You're
to everything
posturing
you
because
said. You're not
okay.
making. You are not making.
Why do you say it
any
was immaterial
sense.
then? It's because you couldn't repeat what I said. I said that there was
No,
an
it's immaterial
understanding.
because it's
that there was an
immaterial because
understanding of transfer that people believed that it was a desirable outcome, but it was not
it is
ordered
immaterial
from
because
the
you're
top
changing
down.
the
It was
language
not
in order to
government
divert from
policy.
the actual issue, which is your contradictory use of the term policy.
Okay, why was the transfer committee not authorized then? Why did they not get sanctioned by the government?
I
were
have
they
no idea.
blacklisted? Okay,
Probably,
so you don't know anything
probably,
about this
probably,
debate.
Probably,
You don't know.
Probably because, well, it was absolutely the policy of the people who were in a position to make decisions. It wasn't necessarily entirely popular throughout the entirety of the government at the time. Like, that's a possibility.
That's because it wasn't policy. You're making my argument.
Jesus
it wasn't
Christ.
policy. It's okay. Shall I try one more time?
I'm sorry, did I say it was the policy of the Israeli government, or did I say it was the policy of Ben-Gurion and the Zionist movement?
you're making up your own definition of policy because you don't know what
But I'm
this debate
really-
is.
I'm
You
really
don't know how
not,
it's
though.
had. The people who argue that it was policy, who try to make the policy argument, actually do point to policy. They'll point to plan.
So listen to this.
But
So
then there's the argument
policy.
over whether or not the expulsions were conditional or not. And now
Policy.
you're gonna
Listen
read
to
out
this,
a fucking,
LonerBox. I'm
like,
going to read out to you.
poli-sci
I'm going
definition
to
of
read out to you.
policy
I'm
because
actually
you
going to
don't
read you
know
the dictionary. I'm
sorry,
actually going
I'm
to read out
talking.
to you the dictionary. I'm actually going
You're
to read out to
reading
you the
a dictionary
dictionary.com.
definition. Okay.
The dictionary definition, LonerBox. I made it dumb for you. Policy. A course or principle of action adopted or proposed by a government, party, business, or individual.
An individual.
An individual. In this
Okay,
case, it's
this
not
is-
just an individual, by the way.
Yeah. What is it? If it's not an individual.
It's several individuals in a high place of power that are part of a specific ideological movement with a particular nationalist goal.
So if the prime minister just like goes out of his house and shoots an Arab, is that Israeli policy because it was an individual?
No, that's an action. That's not a policy.
well,
A policy.
what if he
I'm
wrote in his
gonna read
diary
it
that
to
he
you. I'm
wants
going
to
to
do
read it to you again.
What if he
A
wrote,
course
what if he
or
wrote in his diary
principle
that
of
he wants to do
action
it?
adopted, not an action, a course or principle of action. This is what we will do given such and such conditions.
Do you understand the difference between a general directive from the top down versus leaders saying things in conferences every now and there being an understanding that if you do this, you won't get in trouble, but you won't get in trouble if you don't do it either. That's why.
But they didn't say that though, LonerBox.
That's
You're
why there's
actually
an
just making this
understanding.
up, unfortunately.
What do you mean they didn't say what? Who didn't say what?
Here, I'm going to get you the exact quote.
Is this you fishing out diary quotes and trying to equate them with policy again?
No.
Okay. I could even make that argument better than you can, by the way, because they did say publicly as well, the Zionist Congresses, that they were okay with transfer. No one spoke against transfer.
Well, of course.
I know that argument. I'm not against the argument that people were in favor of it. I'm going against the argument that it was directed from the top down in the same way that Vance was. That's what people argue when they say policy. Some people will try to say that Plan Dalit was the policy. It was just communicated in a more subtle way. I don't think that's the most convincing argument because expulsions happened way outside the boundaries of Plan Dalit and parts inside the boundaries didn't happen. And again, no one was reprimanded for not expelling. Also, no one was reprimanded for expelling because it wasn't policy.
We shall admit into the state all the Jews we can. We firmly believe that we can admit more than 2 million Jews. We shall build a multifaceted Jewish economy, agricultural, industrial, and maritime. We shall organize an advanced defense force, a superior army, which I have no doubt will be one of the best armies in the world. At that point, I am confident that we would not fail in settling in the remaining parts of the country through agreement and understanding with our Arab neighbors or through some other means.
That the letter from 1937.
This
Is
is
it?
from
I'm sorry.
David Ben Gurion to his son. Yes, this is not the only one.
Yeah, you're hinging upon a quote from 10 years, but when they were talking, what's he talking about in that? 1937. Tell me what's happening in
I'm sorry,
1937 that
so
Ben Gurion is
just-
talking about that with. An agreement with the Arabs. What are you talking about?
Well, this is oh fucking hell.
You don't know.
I don't know off the top of my head.
He's talking about the Arab Revolt and the Peel Commission. He's
Okay.
talking about the Peel Commission, which offered a partition of states. And one of the
Yes.
recommendations that was made was a population exchange between Arabs and Jews, and that it would be an agreement between Arab leaders and Jewish leaders. And then, because this was based on transfers that had already happened, because Jews had already been kicked out of Gaza and Hebron in the massacres in 29. And they had this idea that there would be a small Jewish state and a bigger Arab state because there's different borders in 37, and that the Arabs who lived in the Jewish area would go to the Arab state, and the Jews who lived in the Arab place would go to the Jewish place. That was based on what would be in a mutual agreement between the two leaders. He was okay with people obviously being forced to if they said no, but this is not what they did in the Nakba. This was never enacted. The thing he's talking about
According
here
to
wasn't
Benny
enacted.
Morris, Ben Gurion, and Weizmann saw it as a stepping stone to some further expansion and the eventual takeover of the whole Palestine.
Yes, the Peel Commission,
Yes.
which was never
Yes.
enacted.
A
Yes,
stepping
the thing that was
stone.
never enacted. Yes.
Yes, but that means that their directive is to take over the whole of Palestine, right? That's what that means.
It means they have desire. Well, they never did, though, did they? They have desires
It
to
doesn't
do that,
matter
but
if they.
didn't do
It doesn't matter if they never did. Obviously, they still haven't.
Do you think that's
But the
maybe
point is
because
that was-
there's a difference between desires that you communicate in diaries and in meetings versus policy? Maybe it's that.
Well, because these weren't expressed as desires; these were expressed as directives and goals. These are what they are doing it for. Like, I'm sorry, would you consider it, for example, to not be Nazi policy to do the Holocaust if they had failed to do so? If for whatever reason the Jews were successful in fighting back and maintaining a small little
it's about whether or not
sub-region.
you communicate it from the top down.
But it is though.
And
But
you
it is
order
though,
it.
because them not doing this, despite wanting to and intending to, is not the absence of policy. It's the failure of a policy.
No, it would be it would be a fault if Vance went
be the
through
failure
and they
policy.
gathered all the populations, they tried to set up the gas chambers, but just none of them worked. Then yeah, that would be a failed policy. Yes, that's nothing to do with.
But that's
not
what we're discussing
happened
here.
in 48.
Your counter argument, this didn't happen, is literally only the consequence of them failing to do so.
They didn't fail; they chose not to. In 67, they were given there were some people in the cabinet who wanted to go into the West Bank, and definitely people like Ben Gurion still thought this would be really nice if we had all of the land, if we had all of Eretz Israel. They chose not to do it, and that's despite what he said in that letter that you just told me about, and other statements from Ben Gurion as well.
What was the reason? What was the reason for which they chose not to do so?
Depends on who you ask. Some of them said Some of them said it would be because of the humanitarian catastrophe of it, that it would have meant committing like unspeakable atrocities. Other people said international pressure. Different reasons. Yeah, but they chose not to do it.
So
you understand.
In accordance with what I just said. In accordance with what I just said. In accordance with what I just said.
I haven't finished what I was saying.
With what I just said.
Mr.
In
Sunday,
accordance with what I just said.
I did not realize, Mr. Sunday, that we were having this discussion according to your repertoire.
With what I just said. In accordance with what I just said. In accordance with what I just said.
It seems like your methods of interlocution are far beneath you in this conversation.
In accordance with what I just said.
Mr. Sunday.
In accordance with what I just said. In accordance.
You are out of accordance with the conduct of a civil discussion between two civilized men.
I have infinite accordance. I have infinite accordance.
Your lack of accordance is astounding.
In accordance with what I just said. In accordance with what I just said. This was their policy,
Mr. President,
which conditions did not permit them to follow through on. Yes?
That's why there's a difference between a desire and a policy. That's why you can say a thing.
There actually isn't. There actually isn't. That's what a directive is, right? A directive is an open-ended, future-facing attitude. This is what we are going to do given such conditions. If they judge those conditions to not be in place, they're not going to do it, clearly. Yes?
I'm going to ask you again. Do you understand the difference between gathering a bunch of your highest leaders after everyone's been given the orders that they want to implement the final solution to the Jewish question? They gather up the populations of Jews in each European country. They talk about the leaders that they're going to get in the different countries that are occupied to help them out with it. They're talking about how many people they're going to transport to each different place. They're giving directives to start. Yeah, and there are documents.
I can tell you exactly what the difference is. I can tell you exactly what the difference is. No, I can tell you exactly what the difference is. The Nazi leaders are substantially more evil than the Israeli ones were. That's the difference.
It's not about
it really is though, because the distinction there is not between one is a policy and one doesn't. The distinction there is one doesn't give a shit what happens to the people categorically, and there are a lot of people.
They're not mutually exclusive. You can be more evil and also have a policy, and you can be less evil and not have a policy.
That's what I'm saying.
So
you're not.
That existed for the Holocaust. It didn't exist for 48. There were some expulsions that happened with no orders at all. There were some that were ordered in the middle and were rejected, and no one got in trouble for rejecting it. Ben Dunkelman at Nazareth. There were parts of Plan Dalet that had no expulsions.
Your argument was not.
There were parts outside of Plan Dalet that had expulsions.
Your argument in the chat was not that there was a top-down directive to do this right now.
That's what we mean by policy.
Was that it was not. No, your argument in the chat was that it was not policy.
Okay, no, when I say policy, I'm using it in the way that is used by the historians who have this debate. Okay, you might have gone on to your own different personal definition where an individual desires can count as policy.
You're incorrect. Okay, you're incorrect. That's not how policy is used. Policy is used a lot more broadly than that. You're just wrong.
So why do the people who make the policy argument for the Nakba point to a policy? They point to Plan Dalet. They say that was the expulsion policy. That's the whole debate, is whether or not Plan Dalet was a transfer policy.
Because that's something formal that you can point to. If it's discrete, that's a little bit trickier. Just like it's a little. This is one of the reasons why this comes up.
So the policy argument is over something formal that you can point to.
Nazi apologists, for example. Beg your pardon?
But that's the whole debate.
No. That's a clear and unequivocal expression of a policy, but that doesn't encompass policy. You can infer policy from actions and from what people say about their intentions.
Yeah, you can infer it. But there still has to be a policy.
But here's the reason why, LonerBox. Otherwise, you would have to concede that in the event that the Nazis didn't put any of this to paper, but still did everything exactly the same, that would not be their policy. Clearly, that's an absurd conclusion.
Well, the problem is that you couldn't do the Holocaust without a policy. It was an industrial slaughter. How the f*** are you going to do that? But just like every now and then, people writing in their diaries, it'd be really nice if the Jews got gassed in 5 different locations, and then just like, how does that happen? How does that get communicated? How do you get
cultural
like,
revolution, my dude? The Cultural Revolution, my dude. This is actually exactly what happened in China. You had a whole bunch of intellectuals and whatnot being brutalized as the result of a nod by the supreme leader or whatever. Like this is not hard. Now, obviously, you're correct. The thing that the Holocaust was in particular was structured around a particular like informational apparatus. So a lot of stuff had to be committed to paper. But imagine they found a way around that. Like that would have to be the conclusion of your argument. That's not a policy.
Well, you can still have oral orders, but at some point in the chain, you can have an oral directive from the top down.
No. So for a historian or for an activist, say it is much stronger.
That's the entire claim was that Hitler orally ordered it, and then it was communicated in advance. Yeah,
sure. It is much stronger to be able to point to a document that establishes the objective fact of a policy versus having to make inferences from other material that's unofficial. But that doesn't mean that the other stuff isn't therefore policy. Like that doesn't make any sense.
Okay, then just tell me what you're inferring from the material about 1948.
What I'm inferring from the material from 1948 and the actions of 1948 is that the intention was to vacate the Arab population at some point, whether or not all at once then or over a period of time. But I mean, transfer is like it's ubiquitous throughout the literature.
You know what's really interesting is that I've never disagreed with that. I would say that of the war aims that Israel had, they had 3. 2 were very clear. One was survival. The other one was territory. They wanted more territory than was offered from 47. But they also, unofficially, wanted to get rid of as many Arabs as possible. Yeah.
Good.
I would call that a war aim.
We can be friends now.
Would you call that the same as like an unofficial war aim as, say, Stalin giving a policy directive to get all the Crimean Tatars out of Crimea? I just think these are descriptively different acts.
No, I would consider them a policy if you can attach it to an individual or a group or to a government or to a movement. I would say that's a policy. You're talking about a constitutive aim of the thing. Now, I think policy can operate at different levels. So, for example, in the case of Stalin, like, had he done so in a more ambiguous way that is not as amenable to like clear record keeping, that could still be a policy of him and his government, if nonetheless that was the intent, that was understood to be the intent, and that was the action that took place in accordance with that intent. Like that doesn't present an issue for me.
Yeah, you can carry out policy discreetly, but like, at the end of the day, there was a directive given from the very top down.
Yeah, but you're working backwards
out
though.
Of Crimea.
Yeah,
with
yeah,
Israel,
sure, the problem
that was not. There's no evidence of that. There's no.
Okay, but the problem with you affirming the Stalin case, though, in light of what you were saying previously, is that you're working backwards. You're working from the assumption you already recognize it as policy, and then understanding how it could conceivably be so. That's my argument. I agree with that. But what the question is it a policy on the basis of, oh well, we're deriving this from letters and meeting records and things like that, and not, for example, from some unified statement saying, "This is our plan, we the undersigned." I think that's too high a threshold. I think you end up in absurdities that way.
Well, no, you don't, because we can point to, for example, 700,000 people were displaced in the 48 war, whereas in Crimea it was 200,000. But so it's not like a moral thing for raising the threshold. It's just there's an objective difference.
No. You're confused. I'm not saying raising the threshold of the damage done. I'm saying raising the threshold for what constitutes a policy.
I think it's okay. I think most people understand when you say policy versus kind of like unofficial understanding. I think most people know what people mean by that. I think it's
really but an unofficial understanding can be a policy if the unofficial understanding pertains to a directive or a plan held by a organization or a group or a leader.
When you say a plan, though, do you mean a plan as in like
a directive? Think of it like a dialogue. Think of it like a dialogue tree, right?
Directive sounds like orders from the top down. That's what I think when I see directive.
No, because the policy itself can act as a directive. So, for example, if there is an unspoken assumption that no Jews shall be in this government or in this university or something. That would be an unofficial policy of that organization, right? That's the
Give me a
thing you could
specific
articulate.
example.
It would be an accurate description of the intent and aims of the organization.
I mean, like a
given
general
certain
goal.
conditions. It can be a general goal. So, for example, like policy can be as broad as "we do not negotiate with terrorists." That's a very general statement. That doesn't even rise to the level of a goal. That's just an attitude.
Yeah, I would not call that generally policy in the sense, but it depends on the way you're debating, because it's a word, right? The way you use words in general.
Okay, well,
they depend on what we're
man.
debating.
Look. You started off being pedantic about the word policy, not me.
I brought it up because the debate that was happening between Finkelstein and Morris and
Yes.
Rabbani and the other guy, they were talking about whether or not transfer was inbuilt and inevitable to Zionism in a way that would have happened. It seemed to be regardless of what the Arabs and their leaders were doing. So
yeah, and I think the other side
said that,
I think by the way the other side of the argument was kind of stupid for the reasons that we were talking about on that issue.
Yeah, but that's
Obviously,
the only point
there
I'm
were
making.
conditions
Is
under which
that
they wouldn't do so.
That Muin Rabbani guy thought that the Nakba would have still happened if the 47 partition plan was accepted. They thought that if both sides accepted the 47 partition plan, they would have still ethnically cleansed the Arabs, because that was what Zionism was always about. Because again, that's the debate. The debate typically in the mainstream, for the academics have been having since the last 100 or the last 80 years, was that the
LonerBox.
the Arab side of that argument is that the Zionists from the very beginning knew that they were going to move a ton of Arabs out of the way to build their Jewish state, and they were planning it from the beginning. They will point to the village files and they'll say that's evidence of them planning it, like concretely, or they'll use the statements in the diaries. But the counter argument is that there were these desires that evolved and manifest themselves in different ways at different times.
No. Here's where
and then
we agree completely. We agree completely up to this point, because this is where I think Rabbani makes a mistake when he says that the Nakba would have happened. He's conflating the Nakba with the with ethnic cleansing generally. The Nakba is something very particular. It's not simply an act of ethnic cleansing. It's a particularly brutal act of ethnic cleansing, causing the wholesale destruction of the culture and population of the Palestinian population of Palestine. If he was going to argue, though, that the eventual transfer of the Arabs was a policy and was intrinsic to Zionism, I think he's 100% right. That's ubiquitous in the literature going back to Herzl. They're explicit about this. Now, granted, and this is where I think that his conflation with Nakba and transfer is really serious, even though it may practically be an inevitability that the removal of the Arab population would end in some kind of brutality at some level at some point, nonetheless, the attitude of people like Herzl was not to just push them out at the butt of a gun, but was to get them jobs elsewhere. It was to softly economically remove them in a way that they deemed sort of humane, which is naive, but like that was the idea. So I don't think they're wrong on the front that the transfer of the Arabs was absolutely a part of that, but I think they run into problems when they equivocate the transfer of the Arabs with the Nakba itself, or with an act of genocide, the burning of villages, etc.
Okay, I think I almost agree with you completely. I think the problem is when you say that, I think you're lending too much weight to the idea that it was like to call it inbuilt to the movement, because it's it's communicated quite clear in the literature, and your example was Herzl. Herzl mentioned transfer in his diary,
No.
volume diary,
I'm just making
once.
Well,
never mentioned it in any of his books, and the rest of the time he spoke about coexistence between Arabs and Jews.
Well, actually, no, he does, specifically in the Jewish state. He talks about setting off the poor to be.
The poor, the penniless is his diary entry. It's his diary.
That is his diary entry.
Yes. He does not mention it in his books. Yes, which is why
I thought I actually.
It's kind of like if I had a fucking diary entry saying, "Oh, I hate this Charlie guy. I wish he'd like die." And then 10 years later, Charlie comes at me with a knife and I kill him in self-defense. It's like, it'd be quite weird if someone said that I had like planned to kill him because of what I said in my diary 10 years ago, right? Herzl.
Yeah, but if you said in your diary that you planned to kill him, though, it'd be a different story.
Yeah, but as far as the Zionists go, them saying we're going to plan like a mass transfer, then where's that?
Well,
They
it's a
spoke
part
a
of
lot in
the
their diaries about how okay they were with the concept, but them saying them
well,
planning
not just okay with it. They do say explicitly this is a thing that they are intending to do, pending circumstances allowing it. I think that rises to the level of a policy.
I just don't think it does, because you can even tell with during the war, because even the transfers during the war took a while to materialize. You could even tell that the plans were constantly changing as they went through. The first 5 months of the war, the Israeli policy was defense. It was just to try and solidify the convoys and establish their routes between villages and try to stop the siege of Jerusalem. And then
No, I
after,
totally understand that,
when they
but, like,
realized
you
people start fleeing, the first mass flight didn't come from policy at all. It came from, I think they were. The Irgun tried to go to Deir Yassin. They wanted to go and occupy Deir Yassin. And the Haganah only said yes because they were afraid that the Irgun would have done it anyway and they just needed to keep authority over them. They kind of begrudgingly accepted. And in the process of the Irgun going there, they massacred a bunch of people, and then the Arabs broadcast that.
Once again, though, you'll notice I'm not saying the Nakba was policy, right?
Okay, so the Nakba was not policy. Okay, never planned.
No, the Nakba was not policy, but I never said the Nakba was policy.
So what transfers were they planning then? What transfers were policy? Like the evictions of tenant farmers?
The evictions of the Arab population generally, as much as possible, as you said earlier. I'd have to dig for the precise quotes. I didn't come in here to make.
Well, to be clear, the evictions during the war would have been policy. That would have been the Nakba. Yeah, that's the same thing. The evictions during the war is the Nakba. The eviction of tenant farmers, which was happening from about I guess 1870s until all the way up to late 30s, early 40s.
No, but you wouldn't regard every instance of violence in the Nakba as policy. But that would be the distinction.
No, but
policy is at the level of the cognitive part of politics. It's where you decide what you are going to do under such and such conditions. So once again, you're moving again into a place where if the Nazis, for whatever reason, had a more stepped approach where they wanted to get rid of the Jews, but they couldn't, so they just kind of took what they could and let's say equivocally went along with international attitudes towards this kind of thing towards eventually fully exterminating them later. That would still be a policy. It would just be one that admits of conditions.
I mean, that's why people draw a pretty big distinction, though, because the way that the escalation happened is almost like what you're describing. Was before 41, before Wannsee and before the Einsatzgruppen, the Nazi stance was very much Jews and all that. And then even Hitler mentioned a couple of times, at least in his speeches towards the beginning of the war, that he was definitely okay with the idea of Jews dying or being exterminated. But if this is, again, historians will mention this as well when they talk about the functionalist debate of the Holocaust, is they'll talk about how in Poland, when they went in, there were a bunch of massacres happened, disproportionately Jewish people getting massacred. But those were not ordered. That was just a general, well, we know Hitler's is okay with this. It's an ideology. It's kind of pervasive. But there's obviously a big difference between that in 39 and when you get to 41 and it's actually getting properly implemented from the top down and utilizing the state apparatus, the apparatus to do so. But that's why I think it's probably okay to say that 41 onwards in terms of killing Jews was policy.
No. But Hitler being okay with this, especially with this being known, would then constitute an unofficial policy of the Nazi Party, or of Hitler at least.
Okay, right? So what word would you use to distinguish pre-41 to post?
Pre-41 to post.
Yeah.
In what respect? What do you say?
Pre top-down orders to exterminate all the Jews.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily. The difference between that would be between a goal and enacting the goal, deciding that we're going to just do the strongest version of the thing that we want to do.
Yeah, I think most people would say that the difference between before the top-down order is a policy. But if you're saying the Nakba wasn't policy, then
the difference between before and after a top-down order is a top-down order. A top-down order is not necessarily identical with a policy. We tend to talk about policy in that way because we tend to talk about proposals for top-down orders as policies, but policy encompasses more than that.
When you say
because the order could, for example, be judged to be completely in line with Nazi policy towards the Jews, right?
What do you mean?
Well, what I mean is if the Nazis had a policy of the isolation and removal of the Jews, then the order to exterminate them would be in line with that policy. And so there isn't a contradiction here. There's an act that's in line with the policy. This is why, once again, a policy is a directive for action. It's not an action itself. Now, you can institute a policy as an act, but that's not the same thing.
I have no idea what that means. What do you mean when you... Sorry.
Really?
Maybe I'll understand better if we go by examples. When you say the Nakba wasn't policy, do you mean the expulsions that happened in the 48 war then? Were they policy or no to you? Because that's usually what people mean with the Nakba.
If they were written down as directives, then they were policy, yeah.
Oh.
Like if this was if these were actions that were the result of decisions and goals or in line with them, then they would be within the umbrella of policy. But they wouldn't by themselves, like the individual acts of them wouldn't be policies. Like the act of carrying out an expulsion is not policy. Expulsion would be in line with policy. So it's like the difference between tactics and strategy.
So the expulsions in totality, were they policy?
Well, it could be two things in contradiction with each other. So it could be, for example, that there was a policy directive, an unofficial policy of getting rid of the Arabs. However, it was given certain conditions, and so it was against policy to get rid of the Arabs in particular ways, either humanitarian or otherwise.
If I feel like I'm exploring a very idiosyncratic use of the word policy, but if that doesn't,
you're really not. Like a policy like can be like a clear and explicit statement, but it can also be something that you infer even as a part of an organization based upon its own norms and the way it treats like certain things or the kinds of goals it implicitly has. So like once again, like a policy can be an unofficial policy of excluding certain people from certain positions, or a policy of having a certain attitude towards a particular thing, or a policy of doing anything barring certain conditions towards a particular political outcome, say.
Well, like if there's no law, but a bunch of white people aren't hiring black people, would that be like that could be like a company policy, but is it like a state policy? Or
well, that wouldn't be a policy because it isn't predicable of like a specific organization or entity, right?
Okay,
now,
so
it would be the policy of many different things in concert with each other, but beyond that, that would be a policy that is permitted culturally because of like a general agreed upon acceptance of this. But that wouldn't be like a policy as such, because it needs to be the policy of, right? A policy is not just a state of affairs.
No, I don't. That's why I think usually when I understand policy, I just think like it's not an unwritten rule, or it's not like a kind of just sort of casual directive that's given in a speech. I think it's like the cabinet gets together of a government and they say, how are we going to utilize the government and our institutions and our military to achieve a certain outcome? And then they put it into writing and they communicate it down the channels. And then that's what I would class as policy. And outside of that, I would say it's something else.
Yeah. So, but for example, if that same message or that same directive was implemented without committing anything to writing or like having any kind of like official authorization, that would still be a policy. It would still function in the same way. Criminal organizations do this even. Like that's not like, that doesn't mean it's not a policy. That just means it's not the kind of thing that you can point to with respect to like a specific official statement saying this is what we stamp our names on and forthwith declare to be like our official position on this.
I mean, I'd imagine depending on what you're doing, it would be a combination of both, because I think the understanding for the whole. So wait, why was the Holocaust? What do you suppose?
Answer me this. Answer me this.
Okay.
Answer me this. What is unofficial policy? Is that a thing that exists?
What's unofficial policy?
Yes.
Unofficial policy, I think, is generally just like, well, if I'm going to use the example of 48, it's you're not going to get in trouble. Like, people knew that they weren't going to get in trouble if they kicked out Arabs, but they also knew they wouldn't get in trouble if they didn't. So that's kind of what I
Yeah,
say
but people also
unofficial.
know in Canada, for example, prior to the legalization of weed, that they're not going to get in trouble if they smoke a joint in the woods. That doesn't mean it's the policy of the Canadian government.
Yeah, but it just depends on
to allow people
it
to smoke
depends
in the
on what
woods.
you're communicating. It depends on what you're arguing. Because with the argument with the Nakba, the argument is whether it was between a general top-down order or whether it was unofficial. That's what the debate is. I think it was more unofficial, but you know.
Well, I mean, insofar as you're talking about like directed military efforts to expel the Arabs, I mean, you're skirting some lines there, but yeah.
What do you mean by directed military efforts to expel the Arabs?
Well, it wasn't a spontaneous action by just random Jews who expelled the Arabs and destroyed villages, right? Like these were specific expulsions that were determined to be done.
Depending on which operation, yeah, I think about 50 out
Sure.
of the 400 villages were directly expelled. Yeah, some operations it was directly ordered.
Okay,
some
well
of them,
let's just run with the ones that are directly expelled. So once again, like policy wouldn't necessarily mean the universal application of a particular measure that is used in one place to every single place forever and all time in all cases, but it would still be a policy if it was in line with a directive.
I don't really know, but the way you're using the word directive there, it's like when I say expulsions being ordered in the Nakba, I mean like Operation Hiram, where a commander told his soldiers to go and expel a bunch of villages, and they did. But he wasn't told to by his government, or he wasn't told to by the generals. He kind of chose to do it himself. That's kind of what I mean
but
by...
Yeah, but like a directive can be... It gets tricky because we also use directive colloquially with like an official policy in the other sense, but generally when we're talking about like a directive, what we're talking about is this is a general norm or framework for action or desired outcomes or things like that. So if someone who's in a capacity where they are not operating purely spontaneously, independently of some governing body, understands that the goal of that body is X, and then does something pursuant to X, even if there isn't an official acknowledgement of that, that would be operating according to a policy, right? Because there would be essentially an unofficial but understood I suppose like guide to action baked into the ethos of the organization.
Yeah, no, I think those are meaningfully different. I think it's probably good to separate what you just said from something like the Holocaust. Yeah, that's my general position. Yeah. And
how so? But what do you mean? What are you responding to precisely? I'm not
just
entirely sure what you just responded to.
Descriptively, I think there's a difference between a top-down order that is
and the
communicated
absence of a top-down order.
Yeah, and I think the absence of a top-down order, I think they're descriptively different. Yeah.
Okay, but you're in luck though, LonerBox, because you already have the language to distinguish those. One has a top-down order. Boom.
Yeah, and there's a
the sanctity of the word policy is not at stake here.
It's not the sanctity of the... I'm just talking about how the debate is had between historians on the 48 war, and the word they use is policy.
But here's the problem though. The word policy, I think, was introduced in that debate, right? So this is how historians were debating it. They were questioning whether or not it was policy.
Yeah, you should take it up with them because they seem to have been having that debate quite functionally for the last 40 or 50 years, and they've been able to have that debate without anyone being massively confused over what technically necessitates a policy. They've been able to have that. And some people have said this is the policy. Hang on. Actually, that's not really fair to call that an expulsion policy. Yeah, like that's what's happened. Yeah.
Okay, but they're debating that precisely because there is more ambiguity there. It's not simply the case that policy means what is written down as an official proclamation of intent.
Well, that's the thing. Is some people think that that it was clear. Some people think that there were clear written orders to do so.
Well, they're making inferences based upon the letters and the meetings and things like that.
No, they think Plan Dalit was the expulsion policy. That's what they say. That's like the Pape argument. I think that's the Khalidi argument. That the general argument is that Plan Dalit was the expulsion policy, like the policy to ethnically cleanse historic Palestine. Yes. Other people argue that it was a military policy that gave people carte blanche to expel, but on conditions. And those conditions, if they were met or not, didn't really matter. Some people expelled villagers that didn't resist at all. Some people some people chose not to expel villagers that did resist. And yeah, there wasn't really any reprimanding either way. And it also doesn't account for the entire Nakba. So yeah,
Plan Dalit is a much more clear case. The question is whether every single thing undertaken in the course of Plan Dalit was in line with Zionist policy generally, right? So that's now you're just talking about like a policy within a policy. You're talking about like a specific directive with a clear record versus a broader one that is more or less ubiquitous. I think we've already agreed on this. Is more or less ubiquitous in Zionist ideology.
Well, I say a broader understanding. Yeah, like an understanding that transfer is like, as in they believed it would be nice if it happened, but there were still also
not
times
nice
when
if it happened. They believed it would be necessary, and they didn't just desire it. This was like a thing they were working towards. It's not just it would be loverly. That would be like saying a part of Zionism is it would be loverly if the world didn't end. I mean, I agree. Am I a Zionist now? No, obviously not. It's the removal of the Arabs is a particular goal of a Zionist project. Understood.
It was an unofficial goal. Of
understood as a
war,
condition.
Yes.
Understood as a condition of Zionism succeeding.
As a that would be a different. That wouldn't be the Nakba and the expulsions. That would be
as
a condition of Zionism succeeding.
The Nakba would be the Nakba would be an example of something along those lines taking place with a whole host of complications associated with it. But I mean that's not ambiguous though. Like it's not a problem if Plan Dalit is a policy and expulsion is also a policy. Like you can have contradictory policies coexisting because obviously Zionism is not this single homogenous thing. And Zionists and Israeli nationalists are not a single homogenous thing.
Well, I think that's why the debate kind of matters, is because the problem with the policy argument and the way that people try to ascribe the Nakba as something that was inevitable even from the very beginning was because it was like this was.
Yeah, but I mean, I agree with you on that, though. I don't think the Nakba was inevitable. I think that's silly.
Out of interest,
yes.
So we're not circling the drain. Do you think the partition plan should have been accepted or no?
Depends on what you're asking. If you mean in the light of the following history, obviously, in terms of whether they should have accepted it as a rational decision, I kind of agree with Morris. I think that they were essentially being given a bum deal, but I think the expectation that they had any cards to play ultimately to get a better outcome is just not there. So from a humanitarian perspective, like. You look at the current bombing of Gaza, you look at the Second Intifada, etc. You look at everything that's happened since then, you go, yeah, probably they should have taken a lot.
Do you think it would be fair to say that the Arabs entered the 48 war, the Arab leaders entered the 48 war with a policy of either genociding or expelling all the Jews?
You're reading chat, I can tell.
No, I'm not. Where's that said in my chat?
I have no idea. I'm not looking at your chat. You stuttered a little bit at the beginning, so I thought I'd catch you.
I always stutter, but okay. Yeah, that's the question.
I mean, judging by... Well, you have to be very careful there, because there's two things going on. There's Arabs who are resisting as part of a nationalist program that is in reaction to the encroachment of foreign colonial powers, which is the Zionist project and the British there. But then there's also like the Arab population as a whole, which isn't necessarily culpable for what militants within that community do, because remember, like a condition of all of this is that there isn't an Arab state. There isn't a single body that you can assign blame to. So it would absolutely be true that the Arabs who attacked the Jews, I mean, just read what they wrote. Like obviously they hated Jews categorically. These were not nice liberal people who had an issue with like racially targeted animus with no distinction between militants or innocents. But nonetheless, like I don't think that for 1 second justifies what was done to the Arab population either.
No, I don't think it justifies it. I was just asking because of the standard for people might apply to different groups for
like with policy.
Not even with policy, but like, would you say that you could say with policy?
I would characterize the genocide of the Jews as a policy Arab militants. Absolutely.
In 48.
Yeah.
That's the old right-wing Zionist stance. Holy shit. I wouldn't say
Not
that.
of the Arabs.
No, I know,
of the
I know,
ones,
no,
of the ones who were literally attacking
of the,
Jewish
yeah,
civilians.
of the leaders, of the leaders, yeah. That's
Yes.
that's like the right-wing Zionist take. The leaders went in to wage a genocidal war of against the Jews. Yeah, I don't think that's.
I mean,
true.
I'm deferring to Morris here, but
no, Morris does not say that the Arabs were waging a genocidal war against the Jews in 48. He says the opposite.
he doesn't use that specific language. But
No,
I would
he says
interpret the language that he
no.
does.
He's not interpreting the language. He says there's not really any evidence that they were waging a genocidal war. I can find you a clip of him literally saying that with his
No, but
face.
if you literally have people making statements of like the Jews need to be done away with, that's a genocidal statement.
How often did they say
Right.
that? I think there were maybe like 3 leaders who might have said things that could be interpreted genocidally. One is like very ripped out of context of that particular leader's general approach. Al Husseini said he wanted the Jews who arrived after 1917 gone. Maybe not. I don't think he said killed, so it wouldn't have been genocidal in like the UN Convention way. No, I don't think there's any indication.
I wouldn't really regard
had a genocide.
No, because but that's because your threshold for genocide, respectfully, is comically high. Like I think any intent.
Well, you
to
were
remove
saying
a
you quoted
population-
Morris, but I'm quoting Morris, and also,
But I wasn't quoting Morris saying it was a genocide. I'm referring to what Morris cites about them.
Yeah,
I'm
no,
not
yeah. What he
saying
says what he says about them is that I think he rejects.
No.
the notion
You're
that
talking
they-
about his commentary on it. What I'm saying is that like my quotes that I'm drawing upon
Okay.
that I'd have to refer back to get like specifically, but the tenor of them was genocidal to my ears when I read that.
because of like 3
it-
statements in the middle of a war.
If the statements pertain to the eradication of an ethnic group, yeah, definitionally genocidal. I don't equate genocide with the Holocaust. My understanding of genocide is the removal of an ethnic group, period. And just by my lights, it doesn't particularly matter if that ethnic group was there for 4 decades as opposed to 4 centuries. So like him wanting to expel all of the European Jews, say, that's genocidal to my ears. I don't have a problem with assigning that.
I think when I say genocidal, I mean by the UN Convention, which doesn't include removal. But
No. But one of the reasons for the UN Convention having the specific terms that it does is because the people who signed on to it were themselves.
no, I know
complicit in
that.
the
Yeah, I
kinds
know
of-
they were. Yeah,
in
they
the
did
kinds
all
of
did ethnic
things, in
cleansings.
the kinds
Yes,
of
they didn't want to
things,
implicate themselves.
in the
yes.
kinds of things that the source material for the concept of genocide they were actually deploying in Lemsky's book
Lemke.
would actually include. So I don't consider the UN definition to be exhaustive. The UN definition is as good a compromise as you'll get, given the fact that you're negotiating with guilty parties to accept its terms.
Well, the UN Convention is the only one that's enforceable. So I guess that's why that's the one that people use. But
Yeah,
as
sure,
for-
but it is not a condition of an argument being philosophically coherent in either way, either being sufficient or whatever. That it is adopted by a body with power to enforce it. That makes it effective versus, like, I guess, merely intellectual. But I think that a coherent understanding of genocide goes beyond that. But
Okay,
what
so
you're talking about is
when-
like a political decision.
So when I'm asking you about the Arab leaders, do you think
Yes.
they had a policy? Do you think they waged that war with an intent to remove the European Jews from Palestine, but maybe not necessarily to kill them, like in a?
I honestly, I'd have to reread before I committed myself to a particular conclusion as to that. But it's not really a condition of them being killed for it to be a genocide for me. Like, for example, I would not consider the Holocaust to be less of a genocide if the work camps didn't also kill them, or if they simply expelled them all to like the 4 corners of the earth. That would still be the destruction of their culture and their existence there as an ethnic group, right? Like, and to once again, like, it would not cease to be a genocide because they accidentally used an ineffective method of trying to kill them. It would still be a policy of genocide. The definition of genocide is not that you specifically kill all the members of a group, although that's definitely a way you can do it. The definition of genocide simply involves the elimination of that group within a space, which is what the elimination of anything involves.
Yeah, you can definitely try to do it and still be guilty, even if you fail. Yeah. Okay.
Well, not just that, but like what you are trying to do efficiently, like what the actual method is by which you do this, can be various. So, for example, if the Arab leaders did not just get together and say, yeah, when this is over, we want to round them all up and make sure they're all dead. Like, that would obviously be genocidal, but it's not less genocidal at the point where they're just saying, yeah, we don't really care who dies as long as we just get rid of them, and afterwards we don't care. Like, we're not gonna try to like make them suffer or die or whatever. We just want them gone. Like, that would still be genocidal.
Yeah, I mean, I think the quote that people usually hinge on is the General Secretary of the Arab League saying that this war will be a war of extermination and momentous massacre not seen since the Mongols or the Crusades. Right? That's the kind of one that they try to use to say that they were waging a genocidal war. But I don't know. I'm not convinced. It's just a quote. Like, people say all kinds of mad shit during war, but
well, when it's the leaders during a war and they happen to be not strongly discriminating between civilians and militants, I think that's a fair inference. At the very least, you would, like, I don't know, like, I don't know why you would give so much benefit of the doubt. Like, in this particular case, like, I think you probably wouldn't treat these people in the same way like you would a Hitler, for example, because the history and the thing behind it is significantly different. But I don't think the bare fact that something is just a quote means that it is excluded from a reasonable judgment or inference about the nature of what was going on or what people would have done if they had succeeded.
Well, yeah, because that's why people try to compare rhetoric and quotes, which was pretty yikesy in 48 from the Arabs, but compared to what they actually did and what it seemed to be that their troops were aiming for, it seems to be that the Arabs ended that war with pretty like varied intentions. The Lebanese just kind of wanted to make it look like they were at war, but they didn't really do that much at all. The Syrians did a little bit to try and grab a bit as much as they could of the north. The Jordanians kind of just wanted to stay out of it. They even watched the Egyptians.
Well, I mean, by the same
Egyptians
token,
wanted a bit of territory for themselves. Yeah, it just seems like that just explains their aims a bit more. It's like their actions, even if one or two of them said crazy shit on the radio.
Well, like when how about this? Like when Israel led the Lebanese Christian nationalists to the refugee camps. Like that would be genocidal, I think. But I don't think there was like explicit rhetoric talking about the extermination of the Palestinians in Lebanon. You can correct me on this. You know more than I do.
I don't know what the Christians said for that exact.
No. They did. I'm talking about.
I'm not sure. I'm just not what the exact quotes were for that exact act, but it wouldn't surprise me if it were. I've even heard there's one UN report that called that an act of genocide, which wouldn't surprise me.
Well, I think I would tend to agree, but the point is, like, even in the absence of that explicit rhetoric, like I think the rhetoric of that, obviously, like, being given out to like a general audience, like, I don't know, that seems to satisfy the conditions of genocide for me.
Yeah, but then I'd also wonder, like, how many other massacres in that civil war would have been genocidal, because there were quite a lot of them.
Probably a lot of them.
Because, yeah, who knows?
I mean, like, here's one other area we disagree on. I think historically, I think it's completely plausible. I don't think it presents a theoretical problem for genocide to be a very common occurrence, because frankly, it is. It doesn't need, not every single massacre needs to rise to the level of the Holocaust in Germany to count as, because I mean the Holocaust goes beyond a genocide as well. Like, you can make those distinctions too. So, like, I don't think a killing or an expulsion or whatever has to rise to the level of what happened in Germany to be considered a Holocaust. Like, we can admit of, like, there is a threshold beyond which any further action is too far. At a certain point, like, your capacity to condemn has simply been exhausted, and then
I don't think anyone disagrees with that. Like, we have Bosnia. That was only about 7,000 or 8,000 people. But so yeah.
Yeah, but I think being timid about, let's say overly timid about using the language of genocide has the perverse effect of actually downgrading things that don't meet that higher threshold. Because this is the whole argument about, like, is Gaza a genocide? What's the outcome of that argument? Well, the outcome of that argument, if it's concluded that what's happening in Gaza isn't genocidal or isn't a genocide, is that it's okay then. It's not as bad as we thought, and that's how the argument goes. But it really shouldn't be that way. And I think this is one case where Finkelstein actually had a good point in that debate, and I fucking hated him for like the first half of that. I probably will for the latter half of that. But when he pointed out like the fact that this is even approaching like the threshold of the definition of genocide according to the UN, it's like this is
not
bad.
yet. We haven't determined that. Finkelstein has massively misunderstood the meaning of that ruling by the ICJ. They're not even at a stage where they're determining whether or not the South African case is convincing or not. They've just said the rights that were claimed were plausible, and some of the quotes, which have a low threshold of plausibility, which they should, because people can use euphemisms, might cross it. But like as far as the actions, even one of the judges,
that's fine.
Yeah.
No, that's fine. I'm just talking about the principle.
Okay, I got you.
At the point where the ruling, oh, it's not a genocide, is therefore used to downgrade the seriousness of what's going on, or how bad something is, I think at that point you've actually kind of reached a perverse result of trying to maintain the purity of the word genocide to only apply to these specific insane extreme cases. That now ends up being a measure according to which other heinous things are able to be positively compared, and I think that's not good. I think there's a reason for the language that Lemkin uses originally, and it is more coherent and allows for a clearer judgment of situations. Namely, like genocide involves fundamentally, it's in the word, the killing of a specific social group,
just talking at me now.
Whether that's a family group, a religious group, a cultural group, an ethnic group, etc. Like for me, like that's a really simple and easy and clear to apply metric. Holding it up to the level of like, well, no, we need to actually establish a clear on paper intent to remove the 2 million people you've removed from this region with bombs and terroristic violence. Like that's like, okay. Like, okay, sure. The court did not find that to be the case. Great.
Well, I think the problem is and I've seen you do this before, is that's what you hear. When someone says that I don't think this is a genocide, or like, here's why, and oh, it's not that bad. I feel like you did that yesterday when I was talking to your chat, is like, you'll say something and I'll say, I don't think it's quite like that. And you're like, oh, so it's fine then. But no, that's not. Lots of things are bad that aren't genocide. That's why
I think in that
recognize genocide is the worst of all the crimes. So you can have murder, you can have war crimes, you can have crimes against humanity, you can have human rights abuses, you can have apartheid.
But that would have been a response to some statement to the effect of like, I think so and so did this, and so what I'm responding to is an implicit, well, this is just a tit for tat for something else, therefore it's okay, right?
Yeah, but that's not my fault that you hear that.
Well, I'm probably no, but like I'm not necessarily insisting that you are necessarily saying so. I may be laughing sardonically at an implication that I think a lot of people would draw.
Right. Yeah, I don't care.
I didn't go after the fact to accuse you of doing apologia for it.
Yeah, but that is what happens though, right? But again, if
you're doing the exact same thing. It's like, I'm sorry, it's not my fault. Somebody can take that reading from it.
Yeah, well, I'm not interested in persuading people who think like that. I don't, like if someone's going to say like
what?
Like if someone says like, oh, I think what's happening in Gaza is genocide, I say, oh, I don't actually think it is, and they're like, oh, so it's fine then. You support 30,000 people.
No, but in the context of this,
they can eat glass.
But in the context of this, we're literally talking about a debate in which Morris was explicitly referring to like, well, the Arabs aggressed first there, and sometimes you pay for your mistakes, collapsing like the entire Arab population into the decisions of a few, in the absence of there being a state structure. Like that would be the context of saying that, because the argument is literally like, oh, it's okay then, or oh, it's ethically permissible then, or something along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, the way Morris talks is he speaks very shorthand in a way that sounds very insensitive and very unempathetic, right? Because
that's not just the issue.
When he says the Arabs started a war, he's talking about the Arab leaders and the Arab militants. But obviously, I think, for example, you could just ask Morris one clarifying question: is like, a lot of Arab most of the people who got expelled in the Nakba were civilians. They didn't do shit. Some of them were actually peaceful and made strong efforts to be peaceful, and they got fucked as well. Obviously, they didn't deserve that. He'd probably say, "Of course they didn't," right? Like,
well, he'd probably say, "Of course they didn't," but that would be the Bailey, right? because he would absolutely nonetheless be arguing the former thing in order to justify the violence against those people as well. Like, so he would do both. He would talk out of both sides of his mouth, and he would say, yeah, the Arabs struck first, which is why it was not just acceptable, but probably prudent to do a lot of the stuff that happened during the Nakba. Oh, but do you think those innocent civilians who do that deserve that? No, of course not. Like, that's the move. That's one of the frustrating things about him. Is he was very clear-headed early on in his writing, and then he took a dark turn later on.
I don't know if I see that completely. He definitely doesn't like Muslims. That's not deniable. But
I don't think you have to like Muslims or to like Islam or to like anybody for that matter.
no, I mean, he's like
to
bigoted against Muslims, right? Yeah.
Oh, I understand that, but I think bluntly, I think the threshold is so low here. I think even a bigot against Muslims, as I think Herzl was, for example, it doesn't necessarily stoop to the level of doing apologia for their mass brutalization and murder, right?
It depends. Like, I don't really know if he does apologia for brutalization and murder. Like, I don't know. I don't
Well, if
know
he's
if that's
doing apologia
necessarily.
for the Nakba, I think that counts. I think burning down villages is beyond the pale. I think bombing cities is beyond the pale, et cetera, et cetera. Like, we're not talking about like, oh, our hands were tied, this is all we could do.
Well, why does he document the atrocities then? Why does he talk about like things like Deir Yassin and the Dawima and like even the way he writes about the sieges and all that? Like, he's quite clearly acknowledging that they were like indiscriminate and all this kind of shit.
Well, that's what I find perverse about Morris is that, and this is one of the reasons why the right has been so receptive to him recently, is because he was one of these people who actually took this really critical attitude that pissed off a lot of people, and then he just went with I'm okay with this. Like, the issue with Morris is not that he's a bad historian. The issue with Morris is that his moral judgment after the fact, I think, is kind of monstrous.
I don't know if it's monstrous, but I feel like he definitely does do a lot of he's a bit, yeah, there's a lot of things I think that I would consider unethical that he thinks are not so much, even way before 48. Like, but anyway, I want to go back to this debate. Is there anything else you want to talk about? A minute or two.
Couldn't think of anything funny. Have a good rest of your stream.
Bye. That debate was fun for like the first half. Felt like we kind of dragged out a bit. Okay. Are you still doing quit? I don't care. No, I thought he would get a bit more angry if I started doing his voice, but